If we continue with business as usual, we could see ourselves living in a world of at least 3 times that, maybe 4, 5, 6 times that, with consequences that could only be described as nightmarish for all of us everywhere. So climate change means death. Climate change means death, and the UN predicted in 2013 that at that point, 400,000 people were dying a year from climate change related causes. Just think about that number for a second, 400,000. We can expect that number to be far higher now, and there's no other way to describe this than mass murder. Just because it's happening slowly, or just because it's happening in a way that isn't obvious in our everyday lives, doesn't mean that it's not death on an industrial scale. So with a question like that, you have to ask yourself, who's to blame? Who should be held accountable for this? Now, a lot of responses to climate change will place responsibility on the individual. Turn your lights off or turn the thermostat down. But these responses that blame the individual are completely inadequate and don't get to the root of the problem, because we aren't all equally responsible for this problem. And we know that there are people that are far more responsible than others. We know, for example, the Carbon Disclosure Project have said that just 100 companies are responsible for 71% of the total man-made greenhouse gas emissions since 1988, 71%. And those are the world's big polluters: Shell, BP, ExxonMobil, the companies who stand to profit from this situation and are lobbying to keep things the same. But it's not just them, and that's the subject of tonight. Those big polluters have got financial backers. They've got pension funds that will invest in them. They've got bankers that will lend them money. They've got insurance companies that will underwrite their operations. So if we can cut off that financial support, we can stop their pollution. And there's a growing movement across the world that's trying to do exactly that. And I myself am the lead campaigner for Market Forces UK, an organization that tackles banks that fund the climate crisis. And we're having some success in doing that. And for the previous 3 years, I helped run a large campaign that helped successfully got the British government to stop funding fossil fuel projects overseas with taxpayers' money. So we're seeing this progress happen. As a movement, we're starting to have that impact, but there's still so much to do. And because each of us is connected in some way to these financial institutions, we all have a bank account, many of us have pensions. It's a global fight, and it's a fight that everyone can be involved in. So tonight we're going to talk about this fight internationally, but also about what we can do in Northern Ireland to take the fight to the financial industry that's keeping the fossil fuel industry going. And we all have to do this, and we all have a responsibility to do it. We happen to be the humans that are alive at this point in human history, and we have to act. So without any further ado, I'm just going to introduce our panel. So joining us, we've got Alec Connon, who is the coordinator of the Stop the Money Pipeline campaign. Alec's very kindly joining us from Seattle, where it's the morning time at the minute. Alec's very active in anti-fossil fuel struggles there in Seattle, and as well as that, he coordinates the global Stop the Money Pipeline campaign. And his first novel, The Activist, was published in 2016 and was the BBC's Wildlife Book of the Month. Our second panelist is Sophie Cohen, who is the campaign lead for Switch It, a campaign that helps individuals identify if their bank, pension fund, or energy provider is involved in fossil fuels and gives them easy ways to switch away to greener alternatives. And finally, we've got Vincenza Sarifas, who is an activist, ecofeminist researcher from the Mournes. She is an activist with Fossil Free Northern Ireland, a campaign seeking to get the massive Northern Ireland local government pension fund to stop investing in fossil fuel companies. So they've all got a lot to say about this concept of the financial industry and how it props up the fossil fuel industry and how we can tackle that. So just going to dive right in with Alec, who's going to set the scene about why tackling finance behind fossil fuels is so important. So Alex, over to you.
Hi everyone, thank you, Adam. It's nice to be here with you all. And as Adam said, I live in Seattle, Washington, but I'm actually from Scotland, and so it's nice to be kind of calling in from afar. And actually, my dad was from Lisburn, and my grannies and cousins and aunties and uncles are all Northern Irish, so it kind of feels like calling into home from far away. So it's nice to be here with you all today. I'm just going to take about 10 minutes and I'm going to talk about Stop the Money Pipeline Coalition, what Stop the Money Pipeline is, who we are, what we do, and the role of the financial institutions and particularly banks in the climate crisis. And so to start, Stop the Money Pipeline is a coalition that was launched in January of 2020. It's primarily US based, but about 14 months ago, we launched as a coalition of 30 organizations. And over the last 14 months have grown to be a coalition of 155 organizations. I would describe it as being a fairly broad and fairly diverse coalition in that it involves some of the largest environmental and climate groups in the country, groups like Friends of the Earth and Sierra Club and 350.org. But it also involves a large number of smaller, scrappier grassroots groups that maybe don't have any staffing or don't have any, are all volunteer, but are doing really good work in their local communities. We also have a significant number of groups in the organization that are particularly involved in struggles for Indigenous rights and Indigenous sovereignty, like Indigenous Environmental Network, Mazaska Talks, and Ginyu Collective. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why Stop the Money Pipeline, why focus on the financial sector and financial companies. And as Adam said, you know, we're not all equally responsible for causing climate change. Just 100 companies are responsible for 71% of greenhouse gases that are in our atmosphere. But those companies aren't just responsible for creating the pollution that is put in our atmosphere that causes climate change. Those are the same companies that have spent decades spending billions of dollars on climate denial think tanks. ExxonMobil every week for years used to take out a full-page advert in the New York Times challenging the reality of climate science. And they've spent billions of dollars on political lobbying and making campaign donations to politicians so that they can put politicians in office that are willing to do their bidding. Even since the Paris Agreement, the world's largest 5 fossil fuel companies are spending over $200 million a year in political lobbying to oppose action on climate change. And so everything that we need to do to prevent climate chaos and prevent the worst of climate change has to be about challenging the power of the fossil fuel industry. And when you ask yourself, how do you challenge the power of the fossil fuel industry, you pretty quickly can lead you to asking the question of following the money and where is the money coming from. And fossil fuel companies, if you go down that path, if you kind of follow the dollar, follow the money, you find out pretty quickly that fossil fuel companies are pretty much wholly dependent upon loans and financial services and insurance that they receive from big banks, insurance companies, asset managers, institutional investors. And without that support, without that financial backing, they simply can't afford to continue to expand. They simply can't afford to build their new coal mines, new tar sands pipelines. And so for this reason, here in the US, Stop the Money Pipeline has come together, this broad coalition, recognizing that no one organization is big enough or powerful enough to take on something like Wall Street. We've formed a broad coalition and are all pointing in the same direction to challenge banks and insurance companies and asset managers and institutional investors' continued support of the fossil fuel industry when any baseline understanding of climate science shows that we can't go on continue supporting this industry in the way that we have. I'm going to talk just a little bit now, particularly, as I said, we're focused on several aspects of the financial sector. Insurance companies are culpable in the climate crisis as they provide insurance for new fossil fuel projects that without which a new coal mine couldn't be opened or a new oil pipeline couldn't be built. But I'm going to particularly focus on the role of banks and major private banks in particular. And a recent study just came out last week, the Banking on Climate Chaos report. It's an annual report that comes out that kind of adds up how much banks are loaning to fossil fuel companies that have basic business models that are incompatible with the Paris Agreement, or basic business models that are incompatible with reining in the worst impacts of climate change. And that report detailed that the world's 60 largest private banks have loaned $3.8 trillion US dollars to fossil fuel companies since the Paris Agreement. 3.8 trillion is a lot of money It's so much money that it's kind of hard to fathom just how much 3.8 trillion is. To put it into context, the annual GDP of the UK is 2.8 trillion. 3.8 trillion is more than 5 times the combined share market value of BP, Shell, Exxon, and Chevron put together. So 4 of the world's largest oil companies. Combined share market value, times that by 5, and you're still not at the amount of money that banks have loaned to the fossil fuel industry in the last 5 years since the world agreed to the Paris Agreement and apparently started getting serious about tackling climate change. And this money really is the lifeblood of the fossil fuel industry, without which it cannot survive, it cannot expand, it cannot grow. One of the most alarming things about the trajectory of fossil fuel funding and fossil fuel support is that last year, 2020, pandemic year, economy in recession, economy shrinking around the world, major banks actually loaned more money to the fossil fuel industry last year than they did in 2016 or 2017, the years when the Paris Agreement was in its infancy. And so one of the things we're doing at Stop the Money Pipeline very intentionally is putting a lot of focus on the banks that are loaning the most to fossil fuel companies and calling on them to immediately change that and immediately stop loaning money to companies that have business models that are incompatible with reining in climate change. In the US, we're in a very good place to do that. All of the world's worst funders of fossil fuels, all of the world's largest funders of fossil fuels are US banks. The world's 4 worst funders of fossil fuels are based in the United States, based on Wall Street, one street in particular. But within Europe, there are some pretty guilty parties in the financial sector as well. And the worst 2 banks in all of Europe for funding fossil fuel companies are Barclays, which is the 7th worst in the world, and HSBC, which is the 11th worst in the world. Since the Paris Agreement, Barclays has loaned $147 billion to fossil fuel companies, and HSBC has loaned $113 billion. In the United States and within Stop the Money Pipeline, we've been particularly focused on JP Morgan Chase. Chase is one of the world's largest banks, but it is by far the world's largest funder of fossil fuels. It's the world's largest funder of fossil fuels by a 33% margin. It has loaned 1/3 more to fossil fuel companies since the Paris Agreement than any other bank in the world. And we've been working for over 4 years now to try and change that. And obviously campaigning against a corporation the size of Chase, which does over $1 trillion a year in revenue and has over 265,000 employees all across the world, it's going to require building a lot of power before they even notice you. It's going to require building even more power before they start listening to you. And so we've, over the last 4 years, engaged in what I would describe as a real diversity of tactics to shine a bright spotlight on Chase's role in the climate crisis. Those tactics have included regular and frequent protests, including non-violent civil disobedience. Our very first action that I was involved in Seattle back in May of 2017, we organized a press conference outside of Chase's regional headquarters. And we had city council members speaking at it and local indigenous organizers and leaders, and put a pretty bold statement that Chase had 2 weeks to make a public statement that they would not fund the Keystone XL pipeline, a terrible expansion of the fossil fuel industry, or else we would take action. 2 weeks passed. They did not issue that public statement. So we did move forward with our action, and 13 action groups, 13 affinity groups, organized protests at 13 branches of Chase in downtown Seattle, and temporarily shut down 13 branches of Chase. 26 people were arrested as part of that action, and Chase was pretty much unable to do business in downtown Seattle for that day. And that was kind of the launch of the campaign, and we've seen many other actions and days of protest like that. But it's also kind of started in Seattle, but we've started seeing protests at Chase branches all over the US. And there's now a national network of campaigners, and there are regular Chase protests in dozens of states and many dozens of cities, including many of the kind of financial headquarters in the US, like Wall Street in New York and what's often called Wall Street West in San Francisco, have both been the scene of mass mobilization protests that are shining a very bright light on the role of Wall Street and Chase in particular in the continued expansion of the fossil fuel industry. That's certainly not the only tactic that has been involved in the campaign. There's been a lot of inside engagement. There are campaigners within the Stop the Money Pipeline Coalition who are pretty much solely focused on inside engagement and talking to banking executives, talking to the head of their sustainability department, and working pretty closely with them to support them in moving as quickly as possible. We've made literally tens of thousands of phone calls to the CEO's office. We've sent literally millions of individual emails to the CEO's office and executive's office. We've also started calling and emailing board members. The board members are ultimately responsible for the actions of a corporation. So we're starting to name the board members: Melody Hobson, Jim Crown, Tim Flynn. These are people that sit on the board of JP Morgan Chase, and they're starting to hear from thousands of people across the country about their lack of ability to rise to this moment. We also had people following the CEO around the country for a while. I think every talk Jamie Dimon, the CEO of Chase, gave for a period of about a year and a half before COVID was disrupted, usually by Ruth Breach, a friend of mine from Rainforest Action Network. After about a year, Jamie Dimon was speaking, and during his speech, he said, "I am almost surprised there is not someone here shouting at me about fossil fuels." Which was great because it showed that we were getting into his head. And that's how you win corporate campaigns. You win corporate campaigns by taking up the time and emotional energy of decision makers. You don't win corporate campaigns by pissing off bank tellers or by annoying customers or shaming customers. You win corporate campaigns by getting inside the heads of the CEOs and executives of these companies, because those are the people who make the decisions. Those are the people who decide the future direction of the company. In addition to that, there's been a lot of kind of investor organizing that has happened, and a lot of kind of organizing of people that have more access to wealth than I have. I had the surprise pleasure of coaching a billionaire business person recently who had been offered a $30 million loan by Chase and who chose to turn that loan down because of their role in the climate crisis. And because of their wealth, when they turned that loan down and said, "I'm turning that loan down because of your role in climate change," they got given a meeting with the COO, one of the top executives in the company, kind of second only to the CEO. And they had that one-on-one meeting, and then they reached out to us and said, "We would like some support as we go into this meeting." So, and I know that there are other meetings like that have happened as well. There's also been a lot of investor organizing, kind of organizing shareholders in the company. And groups like As You Sow that really specialize in that have introduced shareholder resolutions at Chase's annual general meetings year after year after year. And last year, in May of 2020, there was a shareholder resolution that said JP Morgan Chase must align its business model, must come up with a plan to align its business model with the Paris Agreement. And it got 49% of the vote. Which is seismic for a shareholder resolution. Shareholder resolutions aren't like electoral politics, where if you get over 50% of the vote, you win. It's extraordinarily uncommon for a shareholder resolution to get more than 20% of the vote. And 20% of the vote means that 1 in 5 of your shareholders are saying you must do a thing. So if 1 in 2 of your shareholders are saying you must do a thing, you have no choice but to listen. So it's no coincidence that just 4 months after that, after years of campaigning, JP Morgan Chase finally came out with an announcement in October that we intend to align our business model with the Paris Agreement. They also said that they would be releasing targets in the spring. We expect them to come out this May. intermediate reduction targets that they will meet by 2020 for the oil and gas sector, the automotive sector, and the power sector. All of that sounds great, and it is a meaningful step in the right direction. But this is the latest fight in this struggle, to move financial institutions to align with the Paris Agreement. Is we're seeing a whole series of these net zero announcements. We're going to be at net zero emissions by 2050, or we're going to align our business model with the Paris Agreement by 2050. But we have a climate crisis now, and we need action today, and we need to see fossil fuel exclusion policies today. 2050 promises without 2021 action are pretty meaningless. It's like me going to the doctors, and the doctor says, I've got bad news, you've got heart disease. And I say, okay, well, I'm going to stop eating high fat foods by 2050. Is that okay? And the doctor says, cool, yeah, that's great. If I get a billing of health like that from the doctor, I'm going to change my diet today. And the fossil fuel and the banks need to change their diet, need to change their lending practices today. And kind of vague hand-waving promises about 2050 are essentially worthless unless they are accompanied by action today. And yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all I have to say. I think this is the next front. We're going to see similar announcements. We may already have seen similar announcements from UK banks like Barclays and HSBC saying that they're going to align their business model with Paris or be at net zero emissions by 2050. But we need to respond very loudly and very clearly that that's as good as worthless unless it's accompanied with policies today that mean they stop funding coal, oil, and gas today. So thanks very much for being here, and I'm going to pass back to Adam.
Great. Thanks, Alec, for that overview of the Stop the Money Pipeline campaign. And good to highlight some of the UK banks that are major problems, like Barclays and HSBC up there as two of the biggest funders of fossil fuels on the planet. So now we're going to hear from Sophie from Switch It, who is the campaign lead at that organization, who help people find ways to switch over their energy provider, their bank, and their pension fund away from financial institutions that fund the fossil fuel industry. So Sophie, take it away.
Thanks, Adam, and thanks, Alec. Hello, everyone. So yeah, as I was introduced, switchit.money is the campaign that I've been working on for a year. It was born out of this, I guess there's a frustration. I'm sure everyone here has at times felt slightly helpless at the scale of the emergency. You kind of think, oh my God, it's so massive. I don't even know where to start. I'm going to go make a cup of tea kind of thing. I feel like I've definitely been there a lot of times. And then I guess what was kind of scary maybe as that cup of tea is being made, you kind of think, oh, I'm just having a cup of tea. And then if you have the facts, you realize that actually, whilst you're making that cup of tea, your bank, Barclays, is happily funneling money into tar sands pipelines in Minnesota, threatening Indigenous rights. You're contaminating the Great Lakes. You're basically messing with everything that holds us on this home that we call Earth. And you're literally going to the fridge to get your milk to pour into your tea, and you're like, oh, I'm complicit. I'm totally complicit. And I haven't even done, you know, I haven't even wanted to be complicit, and yet my bank is funding climate breakdown. So it's kind of that, like, not taking action is actually having, you know, you're placing yourself still in a form of taking action by not taking action. You're leaving it lie, and that's a scary thing. So when we thought, okay, let's pair these two things. Let's look at how difficult it is to take action that feels like it's making a difference, and let's look at where we can provide really, really easy information for people. And we bring these two things together, and we've got Switch It. It's the really simple way of finding out if your money is funding fossil fuels in your bank or in your energy company. And you go onto the website and you pop your bank or your energy company in, and we will show you what it's funding and give you very easy alternatives to switch to, greenest alternatives. We did a huge amount of very deep research with a huge amount of help from the Banking on Climate Change report from last year. So as an independent organisation, you know, it's essentially just go onto the website and find out what your money's funding and finding out ways to switch it. So I guess there's not really much more to say other than that, because I don't want to complicate what is a really, really simple action to take. Something that I'd like to add is that I've taken many forms of climate action. I've written petitions, I've taken part in direct action, you know, been arrested for that kind of thing. I've done online campaigns, I've talked to my friends down the pub about it. And, you know, those are the ways that I've chosen to take action, but those aren't for everyone. I think activism on climate can often be quite like a closed bubble, and something that maybe feels a bit difficult to get involved in, or you feel like you have to give too much to get involved in, and then, you know, there's this kind of move away. And I'm sure everyone in this room, as you're already here, might not be in that boat, but I'm sure we've got friends and family that are a little bit put off by the sort of traditional forms of activism. I really believe that for change to happen on a mass scale, we need all of these forms of activism working in a kind of tapestry. You know, we work together in the ways that feel right for us. So Switch It is one way to help engage people who might not want to go vegan or sit in a road, or you know, join a really deep and beautiful campaign like Stop the Money Pipeline. That might be their next stage. Their first stage can be doing something as simple as switching their bank account or switching their energy company. So I just really encourage everyone here to go to the website, follow us on switchit.money on Instagram, switchit_money on Twitter, and then maybe share those social media accounts or the website with your friends and family who, you know, might not be traditionally involved in climate action, but might be starting to feel like there's something wrong and they might want to do something about it. And, you know, it's on a plate. It's a really, really simple way to take action. Psychologically, I think, as I said before, this crisis is so massive that it is really scary. So every little step that we can take will make a difference, not only in moving money out of fossil fuels or pressuring your MP or building a local network of, you know, people zero wasting or, you know, anything like that. But it also starts to build this sort of commitment to doing something, you know, with every sort of successful step that we take that feels positive, another one then might happen. So I'm as interested in the switching the money out of the fossil fuels as I am in encouraging people to actually take ownership over their actions in this crisis, because there's something for everyone to do. You know, you don't just have to be sort of a climate activist to do something. So, as I said, it's a very simple thing. Over the past year, we've shifted £140 million in lifetime deposits out of fossil fuels with the campaign. which we're obviously really happy about. And our aim is to continue expanding, to continue to encourage people, to encourage other people, to encourage other people, and to expand internationally. So we're currently got a database of UK banks, and we'll be moving into Republic of Ireland, Germany, Canada, US, Japan, Australia. Got quite a few partners on the go at the moment to expand that database. So wherever your mates are in the world, just pop them this link and see and let them know that there'll be data for their countries coming soon. So yeah, so as I said, is to continue this inspirational domino effect of action, and to show that we've got such an opportunity to not just highlight the problems about the climate crisis, and not just, you know, point the fingers at the worst offenders. That is absolutely vital, in my opinion, action to take, as I'm sure we all feel here, but also to offer a way forwards, and to offer a solution for people that feel powerless against these massive forces. So yeah, as I said, switchit.money on Instagram, switchit_money on Twitter, and switchit.money on the old interweb. And please do share with all of your friends, not just when you switched, but even when you've been even thinking about it or starting that process, because it's about inspiring positive action. And yeah, thanks for having me on. Passing over to you, Adam.
Great, thanks, Sophie. Absolutely brilliant statistic there. Switchit having shifted 140 million in savings out of fossil fuels over the past year, and clearly lots of exciting things ahead in the future. So we've heard a little bit about how individuals can switch away in their individual finances from institutions that fund the fossil fuel industry, and that's one part of the tapestry, to use Sophie's phrase. But of course, another part of that tapestry is working in our communities to move local financial institutions away from fossil fuels. And even if we don't realize it, we are all connected to pots of money in different ways, even if we don't have any money ourselves. For example, in Northern Ireland, when you pay your rates bill to your local council, you're helping to pay into pension funds for local government council workers, and rightly so. However, that massive Northern Ireland local government pension scheme has got millions upon millions of pounds invested in fossil fuels, and across the world, people are successfully urging their local governments to divest that money out of fossil fuels and put it into renewable and clean alternatives instead, and that's something that needs to happen here. So our final panel member is going to tell us a bit about a campaign that's doing just that. So Vincenza from the Fossil Free Northern Ireland campaign is going to speak now. Vincenza.
Thanks, Adam. It's great to be here with you all, and thanks to Alec and Sophie for those really great presentations. I'm just going to try and share my screen. Great. Hopefully you can see that okay. Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, so thanks for having me. I'm part of the Fossil Free Northern Ireland campaign, which is it's the local part really of a global divestment movement, which is worldwide at this point. And, you know, it really is about trying to get that public money out of these institutions, whether it's universities, local government pension schemes, or anything like that, away from fossil fuels. So Fossil Free NI was set up in March 2018. And its main aim is to get this local government pension scheme for Northern Ireland to divest the £113 million that it has invested in fossil fuels. And it's invested in companies like ExxonMobil, Shell, BP, Mitsubishi, as well as huge mining giants as well, like Anglo-American, whose extractivism around the world causes huge devastation as well. So the scheme itself is managed by NILGOSC, which stands for the Northern Ireland Local Government Officers Superannuation Committee. And the contributors to this scheme include, local government staff, different schools and education and library authorities as well across the north here. So yeah, we really see this as a really important part of achieving, climate justice as well. That's already been, talked about, and it's about tackling kind of the root cause of the crisis and trying to tarnish as well this social license of the fossil fuel industry. And we've already heard that statistic, that it's 100 companies that are responsible for 71% of emissions worldwide. So we know as well that, these, investments aren't just morally wrong, they're actually financially risky as well. So we know that, they're actually valued as if we can keep on burning as much fossil fuels as we want. And that's not true. So they're overvalued, and that puts people's pensions at risk as well. So we're saying it's actually putting workers' pensions in risky positions too. And just to say as well, the divestment campaigning tactic is so effective, and it's been used in other cases as well, like in ending apartheid in South Africa. It was a key part of that as well, and against the tobacco industry too. So we know that it works very well. And we're already seeing, over 1,000 institutions around the world divesting away from fossil fuels. And that includes like cities and whole countries as well, like Ireland, Republic of Ireland, and cities like Berlin and New York as well have divested. And we know that it is like scaring the fossil fuel industry, because in 2018, Shell actually quoted divestment as a material risk to their business model in their AGM. So what has NILGOSC's response been to our campaign so far? They still maintain that they would rather hold on to the shares to engage with the fossil fuel companies. But evidence shows that this just doesn't work. A small place like Northern Ireland trying to influence a huge multinational company whose core business model is the exploring for more fossil fuels around the world. So I'd just like to share a few of the actions that we've been taking during this campaign with you all. So we have a local branch of the Fossil Free NI campaign called Fossil Free South Down, which is the area that I'm living in here. And there's also been local groups in Belfast and North Down as well, who've been active now and again as well. So we try to build people power, we lobby councillors, and we try to get them to pass motions to support us and to contact NILGOSC to try and get them to divest this money. As well as that, we want to try and raise public awareness as well of the issue and the climate crisis more generally. And we've done that through film screenings and workshops and taking part in big protests and collaborations with lots of other different community groups as well. And these are just some images from a sand art day that we held on a local beach, where we made a community art project of sculpting the Mourne Mountains, which are kind of our main mountains here in South Down, out of sand, and then filming that as the tide came in to symbolise sea level rise. And talking about pension funds isn't always super glamorous, so we're very keen to use like creative tactics as well to get attention and to get into the media and to raise awareness about this issue. We also held a climate ribbon day in a local park with a local primary school. And this is a collective art installation as a way for people to acknowledge climate grief. And so, yeah, these are really just spaces for us to, build relationships and connections within our communities, and then to have the sort of difficult conversations around the climate crisis as well. We've done some sea swims as well. And then we've taken part in, the global climate strike. And then the group from North Down did a brilliant blocking exercise as well of one of the main roads into Belfast. And for us as well, the way we organise is really important to us. So we try to do it in like a horizontal way and use consensus decision making as well, because we're trying to move away from oppressive structures. We don't want to like replicate them in our movements as well, right? And because of all of these actions that we've been doing and taking part in, the campaign was successful in 2019 in getting a motion passed by Newry Morning Down Council to support the call for divestment, and that was possible with the help of supportive councillors as well. And I should say Patrick Brown was really important in that motion. And since then, this has spread to 3 other council areas: Belfast City, Fermanagh and Omagh, and Derry and Strabane Council as well. But we really would love to see this spreading to all of the council areas in the north here. And as well, I think it's really important to mention, in times of COVID, we've seen a lot of really interesting conversations coming up around this idea of like building back better. And we would really love to see divestment in the north used as an opportunity for community wealth building as well. And this is being done by other council areas across the UK. So we saw Lancashire City Council invested in the UK's first community-owned solar power cooperative. And then we see Falkirk Pension Fund in Scotland investing £30 million in social housing as well. So I think, instead of outsourcing our investments to transnational corporations, it's a really good opportunity to redirect our commonwealth away from the private gain and towards the community and environmental renewal as well, to build more resilient and democratic local economies moving forward. Yeah, and just to finish off, what I'd love to say to everybody listening in today, especially those based in the north here, that we would, love if you're interested to get involved in the campaign. We're always looking for more people in different parts of the north here to get involved, because we really need, momentum and people power to win this campaign. And we do really believe that it is winnable. I think it is something that we can do locally here that could have a huge global impact, So yeah, we would love to see, maybe other local groups taking on this issue and pushing more councils to pass the motion and putting more direct pressure on Nilgosk as well. And I'll say as well, that there's lots of resources to help if anyone's interested in getting involved. We have lots of reports and email templates, and there's a lot of work being done already. So yeah, we're happy to talk more about that and to share that around. And yeah, just to say as well, we're part of a wider grassroots network of groups who are campaigning to get their local councils to do this across the UK, as well as other like NGOs like Friends of the Earth and Platform in London. So yeah, there's lots of support there if anyone's interested to get involved. So yeah, we'd love to hear from you. So please do reach out on our social media, or you can send me an email. My email is on the screen, or you can send Declan an email as well, who works for Friends of the Earth Northern Ireland. So thanks so much for having me, and I'm looking forward to the discussion now. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Vincenza. So I hope you'll not only use www.switchit.money to change your bank account or pension provider, but that you'll also join the Fossil Free Northern Ireland campaign, and we'll make sure those details are circulated to everybody who signed up on the Eventbrite. So we really do need every local council in Northern Ireland to pass a motion in support of the campaign. So now it's over to you. So we'll do the Q&A now for the remainder of the time until 6 p.m. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask people to, it's in the chat there, if you want to ask your question, please either raise your hand using the, if you look at the bottom of your Zoom screen, in the bottom right, there is a reactions panel. You can click raise hand. So if you do that, or if you raise your hand in real life, I'll try and pick you up on the camera. So I think what we'll do is we'll take a round of questions, then go back to the panel. So maybe if we take the first 3 questions, so feel free to raise your hand and we'll take the questions. And if you can be as succinct as possible with your questions so we can get through as many as possible. Who's going to be first? It's always strange to ask the first question, but after that, the floodgates usually open. So the first question there is from Colin McClure. Colin, do you want to ask your question?
Hi, yeah, can you see me okay?
Yep.
Okay. The first question is, it's about private investments as well. So I know you were talking about pensions there, but there's a lot of private investment funds which will now fund ESGs, the environmental sustainability funds. I was just wondering of your take on them, because I've heard that they're kind of not very well managed, if not actively managed. And so I just wanted to see what your thoughts on the ESGs were.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Colin. So let's take two more. Who's next? Keep my eyes peeled for anybody with their hands physically up. So Diego, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, definitely. It actually is kind of along the same line of the ESGs, and it was it's a nice structure. I mean, it's one of the structures that exists. So how could we kind of use those same structures to benefit basically, or to impulse a way towards sustainable goals as well, and real sustainable goals?
Great, thanks for that, Diego. So similar question around the ESG funds, environmental, social governance funds. So maybe let's take a final question, then return to the panel. Paul, do you want to ask your question?
Oh, hold on. Yes, this may be a very basic question, and forgive me for this, but you're talking about 60 companies. Is this 60 parent company or 100 parent companies, or is this 100 companies overall? Because if you're looking at the likes of the major multinational corporations, I forgot the names of them now, my mind's gone completely blank, like the washing machine companies. What do you call it? Anyway, is there an actual way to sustainably avoid procuring stuff off them, or are you just buying it from another company under the umbrella organization?
Good question, Paul. Thanks for that. So let's return to the panel. So we had two questions there about investment funds, this whole proliferation about ESG funds, environmental, social governance funds that are supposed to be more ethical than your average fund. And are they well managed? How do we navigate the whole question of those? So does anybody from the panel want to jump in on that? If not, I have something to say on it. Alec, yeah, go ahead.
I can kick it off, but I would like to make the clear caveat that I am a campaigner and not an investment advisor. Or it's not my strong point. I think they really are a mixed bag, and I think you kind of want to have a look under the hood of the car, as an American might say, before you buy it. I know that I was looking at some sustainable investment options recently, and I was shocked to read in a list of renewable companies that you could invest in, BP was on the list, which is shockingly egregious, as it's one of the world's largest polluters and one of the world's largest fossil fuel companies. So I think there is a lot of kind of smoke and mirrors goes on, as in what is being called a sustainable investment. But I think there are a lot of good options out there as well, and there's a growing number of good options. And I know that I read there was one recent study that showed that renewable energy companies have outperformed fossil fuel companies by 437% since the turn of the millennium, if I'm remembering the time frame rightly. But certainly, if you do a direct comparison of the return on investment of renewable companies versus fossil fuel companies over the last decade plus, there's only one winner. So I think it serves you to do the research, but I think you want to look pretty closely at what you're investing in, and probably not just take a large asset manager like BlackRock or Vanguard's word for where your money's going. But Adam, or maybe others, can have a little bit more nuance on it than I can.
Yeah, maybe just to elaborate on that as well. So it's a huge problem, this ESG thing, because a lot of it is very well-meaning, but there are lots of people out there who are really taking the piss. There are lots of people who have realized that there's a generation of people growing up now, the Greta Thunberg generation, if you want to, will become entwined in financial institutions and aren't going to want to invest in all this horrible stuff. So they're trying to find ways to market the same old stuff to those people. So it's a huge problem. Just give you an example from my work. We've been tracking companies that have been involved in the proposed Adani coal mine in Australia. It would be, if it gets built, it would be one of the biggest coal mines in the world, and it would open up another 6 coal mines of similar sizes at a time when the UN tells us we can't build a single new coal mine and stay within climate limits. There's a company called Adani Ports, which is part of the Adani group, that's building the mine, and we found out recently they were listed as on the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, which is just shocking, really, absolutely shocking, given that what that company does is provide infrastructure services to make coal mines possible. So that's being challenged at the minute by one of my colleagues who have got the Dow Jones Index to review that company. It's great that that's happening, but it shows that there are companies, a bit like what Alec mentioned about BP there, that constantly slip through the net. So it's a little bit about like what Alec said around this whole we're going to be net zero by 2050 thing. It sounds good, but then once you look under the hood, things get a lot more complicated. And of course, there is no single definition of ESG as well. I imagine as time goes on, that's probably something that's going to get more and more sorted. There will be some single definition at some point, but I think one of the killer questions you can ask if you're making these investment decisions in your own life or at work or whatever is, does this invest in fossil fuels? And if the answer is not an unequivocal no, then it's suspect, definitely. Maybe just to turn to Paul's question about the 100 companies. So those 100 companies that have done 71% of all global emissions since 1988, they are from the CDP's carbon major supports. Largely they're fossil fuel companies, but there's also companies like cement companies, and there are probably some heavy industrial companies as well, perhaps ones that manufacture washing machines and other things. Is there a way to avoid these companies? It's extremely difficult to answer that question because ultimately we live in a world where everything is hardwired to allow us to make unsustainable decisions without our real consent. It might be that even though it might be hard to avoid all of these companies, there are certainly ones that are worse than others. And what we can do in our own lives through Switch It or by being involved in some of the campaigns that Vincenza has been talking about is that we can make it not good business to be part of those companies or to do business with those companies, and hopefully move ourselves towards a situation where it's possible to avoid those companies. Did anyone else on the panel want to comment on any of the questions that have come up? Or we'll take another 3, if not. Yeah. Okay. So let's take another round of questions. So again, if you want to use hand in the chat or hand on video, we'll take your questions. No one at all?
I can ask a question, Adam.
Go on ahead.
Sophie, I hope it's okay if I ask you a question. I am curious, what is one of the most common obstacles or blocks for people moving their money out of a polluting bank to a cleaner bank?
Very good question, Alec. Thanks. Well, I think the first block, which is kind of the biggest block and the one that concerns me the most, is ignorance. So simply not knowing what their money's funding and therefore not feeling as though they are responsible for it, which is totally not their fault at all. And so I feel it's up to those of us who are aware of it to communicate with our loved ones and our networks. So that's the first thing. Another barrier is this kind of, oh God, all of my standing orders and my direct debits are all in this sort of, and they're all, you know, been giving to this charity for however long, and it's a faff. That it's a faff, right? There are, well, first of all, I've done it and it's not a faff. Maybe that's, you know, I think if you have a large number of investments or assets that might need more focus, then it might be a bit more difficult. But there are organisations like Current Account Switch, that's a very trusted website. They've been doing it for yonks. You can just go on there and they can help you do all of the switching at the same time. Equally, some of the banks that we recommend do a switching service that's free at the time of switching, so it's actually not nearly as difficult as you think. And then I think the third barrier really is that there's this sort of, it's this feeling that they've been with a trusted kind of bank person for however long, your friendly branch down, you know, HSBC in your local town, you've just been working with forever, and they know you inside out, and you know all of your finances, and everything feels safe with them. And I think that's, you know, it's this psychological block of like this sort of safety with an organization that's got such a good marketing department that they make you feel really safe, and they make your money feel really safe as well. So yeah, it's that classic human feeling comfortable, don't want to move. So yeah, I think it's again up to all of us to demonstrate that it's not safe really to leave our money in those institutions, and yeah, get it out as quickly as possible. And something I didn't say before, actually, just on that note, is it's not just about switching the money; it's about pressuring those banks and saying, you know, I'm moving my money out. What are you going to do about it? Because this shift in money is not just to go, okay, we're rid of the fossil fuels. Like, we need to demonstrate to the banks that there's a reason that we're doing it. So yeah, once those barriers are overcome, a little note before you do the switch would be great.
Brilliant, thank you, Sophie, and great answer from Alex. So we're at the top of the hour, unfortunately. So I'm afraid I can't take any more questions, but thank you very much for joining. I hope you find it a stimulating event. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to Accidental Theatre for their technical assistance. And I want to leave you just with a bit of an uplifting story about some of these things and about how this type of campaigning works. A couple of years ago, I was involved in a campaign working with groups in Indonesia who were fighting new coal mines and new plants. Coal is the dirtiest fossil fuel. It's bad for your lungs and for air pollution as well as the climate. We spent a lot of time lobbying Standard Chartered, HSBC and other banks in order to get them to not give new direct project finance to new coal plants and mines, which was successful. There's still a lot of work to do, but we started to hear that there are Indonesian coal companies, some of the biggest coal companies on earth, who are openly complaining in the press about how difficult they're finding it to get a bank loan or to get insurance or to get financial support to build their new coal mines and plants. So that really shows that some of this finance campaigning can actually make a huge difference, because that means less air pollution, less climate pollution. It means there are people walking around Indonesia today breathing clean air, not having their livelihoods destroyed by coal mines. So this type of stuff works. So I hope you'll join in getting your bank switched away from fossil fuels. I hope you'll join the fossil-free Northern Ireland campaign. And yeah, I hope you've enjoyed the event. So thank you for attending and have a lovely evening.